but I want you to understand what VAERS is, why it was set up. This is an article from 2003, MMWR. Actually, this is from the CDC. Despite its limitations, VAERS contributes to public health in critical ways. CDC and FDA have published and presented numerous vaccine safety studies based on the analyses of VAERS data. The high number of reports and national coverage increase the possibility of detecting or better understanding adverse events that might occur too rarely to be considered as a signal in pre-licensure clinical trials. Okay, some more stuff here about VAERS and why it was set up. These articles are from the 1990s. VAERS is the initial safety screen, potentially providing the earliest signal of any new vaccine reaction. A reporting system of this kind has major limitations, including underreporting, lack of specificity, and lack of natural control group. Now, I want to give you a current example of how the CDC used the VAERS data. Myocarditis and pericarditis in young people. They had received over 1,200 reports in VAERS of this problem. So in this case, the CDC followed up on it. The FDA also followed up on it and took action. They issued a formal warning regarding myocarditis and these COVID vaccines on June 25. Nobody seems to be paying attention to this warning, but nevertheless, it's been issued. And this was what caused them to jump on this issue. It was the data from VAERS. Now, are there any other signals from VAERS that we are not following up on for some inexplicable reason? This is from OpenVAERS. They compile the data from VAERS on a weekly basis so that people can go there and look at it. We are now up to about 12,000 deaths reported on VAERS, about over 500,000 adverse events reported. These are heart attacks, myocarditis graphs that you're looking at. And this is death. Now, I want you to look at this graph very carefully. You don't have to be a scientist to look at this and tell me what you see. This red line are all deaths reported to VAERS by years. On the extreme left, you see 1990 when VAERS was first established. And then on the extreme right there, you see this year, 2021. Do you see any part of this graph that looks different from other parts of the graph? You see this kind of flat baseline kicking along near baseline for all of these years. And all of a sudden, and by the way, 2021 is not over yet. We're a little more than halfway through, and you see that huge spike. What about reporting to VAERS by doctors? Now, the majority of people that report to VAERS are doctors. How likely are they to report to VAERS? This is a survey done of physicians, and about 30%, 37% of healthcare providers had identified at least one adverse vaccine reaction, but only 17% of them said that they had ever reported to VAERS about it. So even among doctors who are detecting things, only about 1/5 or 1/6 of them are actually bothering to report to VAERS. This is Rosenthal and Chen from the 1990s, again, talking about VAERS. They report that reporting sensitivities to VAERS range from 72% for poliomyelitis to less than 1% for some conditions after MMR. So there's a wide range of underreporting going on. Reasons for underreporting to VAERS: failure of the patient to recognize the connection of illness to vaccine, failure of the physician to discover the relationship, including time course of events. Some reactions are delayed, that's important. Physician deems reporting unnecessary. Physician is too busy, that's a big one. Physician does not know about VAERS. Common but catastrophic events such as heart attack and stroke are potentially even less likely to be recognized as related to vaccination because of high background rates in the population. Is everyone at equal risk of dying from COVID-19? We know that obesity is a predictor of poor outcomes with COVID. This meta-analysis found that you have an 88% higher fold risk of adverse outcomes with COVID if you are obese. As Seventh-day Adventists, we've been given the health message. Here we see this study published in British Medical Journal Nutrition that a plant-based diet is protective. This is 2,884 frontline healthcare workers from 6 countries. And they found that those following plant based diets had a 73% decreased risk of moderate or severe COVID compared with standard diets. And interestingly, they found that people who were on one of these keto diets, these high protein, low carb diets, had an almost fourfold increased risk of moderate or severe COVID compared with the plant based eaters. See. What about people who've already had COVID? There is data here. This is from the journal Nature a couple of months ago. Long lived immunity evidence in patients who've even had mild disease. This is from bone marrow plasma cells and long term B cell memory. This was a study done of the Cleveland Clinic Health System of 55,000 workers or so of those that had COVID already who were not vaccinated. Not one of the 1,359 previously infected subjects who remained unvaccinated had a SARS-CoV-2 infection over the duration of the study. So we see real life evidence here of the protective effect of a previous infection with COVID. The risk calculus is different for moderate or severe disease, depending on your age and different health habits, different medical comorbidities, and whether or not you've had COVID in the past. So in summary, I'd like to say selectively reporting only certain forms of risk estimates results in a reporting bias. Ecological data is unreliable as evidence of an association between an exposure and disease. Cross-sectional data, such as the hospitals reporting their prevalence data, is rife with confounding. Such data should not be thrown out. I want to make that clear. Cross-sectional data gives us important clues, but then we need to follow up on it. Such data should generate hypotheses, but not be taken to prove a causal relationship between an exposure and an outcome. Controlled observational studies to date did not control for presence of COVID-like symptoms at the time of enrollment. VAERS serves an important role in generating signals of unusual patterns of disease or death. VAERS has generated a huge and unprecedented spike in deaths since the rollout of COVID vaccines. Underreporting to VAERS happens for many reasons, and there have been no studies looking at vaccination and all-cause mortality. Health habits and comorbidities modify the risk of moderate or severe COVID, and natural COVID infection confers long-lasting and effective immunity. Such persons may only be taking on risk by choosing vaccination with little or no expected benefit. And with that, I'm going to return to my screen here. I just want to talk very briefly in the couple minutes I have left. I've seen about 60 plus patients now with adverse reactions that began with their first or second COVID vaccine dose and which have persisted for months. They include a death, a stroke, unexplained shortness of breath in patients with no prior history, neurologic syndromes, and psychiatric complaints of mental fog, anxiety, or severe sleeplessness. Many of these began the day of or the day after they received the vaccine. My patient, who is a veteran nurse at a nearby hospital, has not been able to work, going on 4 months now, due to attacks of uncontrollable shaking, which lasts for hours and hits her about every other day. The shaking began while she was sitting in the observation chair minutes after her second dose of the Pfizer shot. She was tearful, stating that she wants to go back to work. She had to walk out of the grocery store the other day because she could feel an attack coming on and she did not want to create a scene at the store. There are some who will say that these life-changing events and even tens of thousands of deaths perhaps are worth it because 600,000 COVID deaths have happened in this country. That number, by the way, is most certainly inflated, topic for another day, and also is a running total over several COVID seasons. If we had evidence that the vaccines would result in reduced all-cause mortality, then a utilitarian ideologue could argue that it is, quote, worth it. However, we do not have such evidence. All we have are anecdotes from thousands of patients, families, and doctors from all over the country that on top of the tragedies from COVID, we are experiencing additional tragedies from these vaccines for some people. It behooves the CDC and the NIH to follow up on these reports and conduct large scale, prospective, controlled studies with follow up extending to years in order to get a true picture of what is happening. Even if it were true that the vaccines were saving lives, I and others reject the medical utilitarianism that says that in order to save a greater number of lives, some people must be sacrificed. If we were a population of salmon, this argument would be acceptable. But we are humans that are capable of making choices about what we eat, whether or not we exercise, and what we put into our bodies, and what we owe our God as stewards of the bodies He has given us. So I'm going to give the time back to Scott at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Song. That was informative, and that's putting it mildly. I'm sure, like all the viewers, I was a viewer of that with you. You're probably thinking two things. First thing, can I share that content? So, with your permission, I'm going to segment that off, and we'll put this whole live stream up. But just that right there is that powerful, power-packed information. The second thing people are probably thinking is, Scott, could you please submit Dr. Song's resume to CNN so that she can be the next medical correspondent for CNN? I think that would just be a dream come true because she's shaking her head. She doesn't think that's going to happen. But thank you, Dr. Song, for that information. You're not hearing this on the mainstream media, though. That's why I make the kind of the joke about that, because of all of that we just heard, how much of that is being said and taught. And so that's why this platform needs to exist, why bringing on these experts and medical voices and people who are seeing this in their practices on the ground, clinical and researchers. This is a very serious need during these times where people are seeking for information and trying to understand what's going on, because we know there's deception happening in this world. We know there's a devil seeking to deceive and to destroy. And so God is the healer. He has the answer. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And so he's called us to share and bear a health message. Now, as we try to navigate these things, what is that health message? We do, I think, finally have Dr. Joyce Che, who's going to be able to share with us her perspective on what is this thing that we Seventh-day Adventists call the health message. People might be like, what is this jargon? And well, what was your background growing up, Dr. Joyce? And how has your view of how to apply these things changed over time, and what are the methods, medical and otherwise, that God has called us to use to prevent and heal disease?
Thank you, Scott. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Praise the Lord. um, my topic that I wanted to talk about was the subject of what is it that we want to help people to understand. You know, we're in the middle of a pandemic. People are scared. And what is it that we're supposed to help people to do? What do we have to offer that gives them hope? And, some of my colleagues here on this panel touched upon hydrotherapy and this type of thing. I thought what I would do is I would share a little bit about my story, and I thought that might help illustrate this for some people. Now, I grew up with a mother who had gone to nursing school. My father was in medicine; he was an anesthesiologist, and but in my home, we did mostly natural remedies. I don't remember taking antibiotics or medications that much. Maybe we took some Tylenol and ibuprofen or that kind of thing. But I do remember my mother, when I was a girl, her applying hot fomentations to my chest when I got sick, and poultices of charcoal and this type of thing. And I always thought that this was a nice thing, but I had no idea of how powerful these types of remedies could be until the year right before I went to medical school. And we had someone come to our church from a lifestyle center. And he shared about how when he was in a very critical time, somewhere out in the forest, and he didn't have access to medical care, he had used hydrotherapy. And then he also shared about how he had used charcoal. And I thought that it was amazing, these things that I had used growing up, that they could be used for really difficult, extreme situations. Um, and I was really naive when I went to medical school. I had grown up reading about, you know, what Mrs. White says about health, about disease, disease being an effort of nature to um, to get rid of impurities and to help itself improve. And I guess when I went to medical school, I kind of forgot about a lot of these things. I was learning about, medications, pathophysiology, and all of these things that you have to learn about to graduate from medical school. And I remember when I graduated, during that time, I'd read some books about herbs and natural remedies and drugs and Mrs. White and what she had to say. And I guess, because everybody that I knew was going in the same direction, which was allopathic medicine, um, I kind of quieted my conscience, and I just thought, this is the route that is best. There's nothing else that I could see. And when I was in residency, when I first started residency, I started having some health issues myself. And I was put on a powerful antibiotic. It was called trovafloxacin. It was taken off the market because it caused liver failure and death. So within a year, it was taken off the market. And I didn't realize this, but this category of medications, fluoroquinolone antibiotics, became well known for causing a lot of issues. And I started having a lot of issues myself immediately after the antibiotic. This was my first experience, I guess, with medications gone bad and physicians who may not have all the answers. And with me developing some of the symptoms that I had that weren't necessarily diagnosable, I had severe chronic pain and fatigue. And I couldn't, when my sister had a baby, I was worried that I wouldn't be able to hold on to her children because I was so weak. And these fluoroquinolones, they're well known to cause issues for the mitochondria, for connective tissue, even for neuropsychiatric type of problems. And I just went for the rest, the next 10, 20 years with chronic pain and these types of things. Um, and as time progressed, I guess I started realizing that modern medicine, as good as it may be for certain things, did not have all the answers for me. And me as a physician, it caused me to start thinking about patients who had really severe chronic issues that nobody else could explain, and wondering what to do. And it was when I had graduated from medical school and had been in practice for a number of years that I went to a lifestyle um, center, a place where they taught people how to use natural remedies. It was a Seventh day Adventist place, and it was going to be a week-long session on natural remedies. And this was where I learned again about some of these things that I had learned about growing up, the hydrotherapy and the charcoal and this kind of thing. But rather than in just a very, powerless way, I think a lot of times when people think about natural remedies, they think because it's not associated with multi-million dollar research and development and all this bling bling advertisement and that type of thing, that it's just not scientific. And so going to this seminar, it was really, really eye-opening. Um, we learned about how hydrotherapy had been used during the Spanish flu, and how during that time when so many people were dying. I mean, this was a time where you had so many people dying that your funeral could only be like 5-10 minutes because there were so many people that needed to get buried. And learning about how these Seventh day Adventist places had such low mortality rates using these simple remedies, no medications, but hydrotherapy, charcoal, lifestyle, diet, sunshine, trust in God. It made a profound impact on me. And during that time, also, this was a time when people were really concerned about antibiotic resistance. People were concerned that we were having more and more bugs that were getting more and more powerful, and we're running out of medications to treat them. And I was praying about this, and I thought, Lord, really, do you not have an answer for us? What is it that we're supposed to do? And that's when we learned about these things. And when I went home, I purposed in my heart that I would do what it was that growing up as a young woman, I had thought that I would do in medicine. And when I went home, I thought, how am I going to share this with people? Because how am I going to tell someone to put a charcoal poultice on or do hydrotherapy or this type of thing? And I thought, you know what? I will start with the people who have failed everything else. And it just so happened that, God put people in my life who were failing antibiotic therapy. I had a coworker who was going home early from work, and she was leaving the OR. I was a surgeon there, and I asked her why she was leaving for home so early, and she said, my son has had a fever for the last week or two. We found out he has pneumonia. He's been on antibiotics. His temperature is still super high. It's like 101 degrees, and I got to go home and take care of him. And I told her, I said, you know what? There's this great simple therapy that you can do. You could do fomentations, but that's probably a little too complicated for you right now in the 5 minutes I have to talk to you. But let me tell you how to do a hot and cold shower. We call that contrast shower. And Dr. Andrew Chung mentioned how you do 3 minutes hot, 30 seconds cold, 3 minutes hot, 30 seconds cold, 3 minutes hot, 30 seconds cold, always end on cold. And I was a little bit, I didn't know whether her teenage son, I think he was about 14, 15, whether he would do it. Um, but when I saw her the next time, she said that because she had told him that a physician friend of hers had recommended this, that he said, okay, I'll try it. And I guess he was desperate enough. So he got into the shower, did the hot and cold therapies, and then he went back to bed. You have to go to sleep for about at least 30, 45 minutes or so to boost the immune system and really potentiate the effects. And he said, I think I feel a little better. And he went to sleep. And guess what? He was afebrile when he woke up the next morning. And this, for me, was an amazing thing. And it gave me a lot more confidence to talk to more people about this. And everybody that I helped with it, they had failed antibiotic therapy. They were already on antibiotics for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Some of them had,